Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and a really warm welcome to this session this afternoon. I'm Rachel Andrew. I'm going to be chairing the session this afternoon, so looking out for your questions in the chat box and making sure that you know who's coming next and what's happening next. I head up Learning and Development and OD at Dudley Group, and I'm calling from Walsall in the West Midlands at the moment. So the first is a thank you. Thank you to Think Learning for enabling us to host this session. So they're our event partners for this afternoon. And they're going to be running a session shortly after 2. So just to make sure that you've seen on the welcome screen that we're asking you to switch your cameras and audio off at the beginning so that we can focus on our speakers. And we are really looking forward to hearing your questions through the chat box. There'll be an opportunity for you to ask all of our speakers questions at the end of their speaking slot. So if you can pop them in the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on that. I've already seen people go in live with hellos to one another in there, so it's lovely for you to have got that. Just so you know, you should have been flagged already, but we're recording the webinar so that people can dial in afterwards, and you can also see some of the breakouts that you haven't been part of. So we are recording the session. We've also got, I know they've put the hashtag in, we've got a Twitter conversation, so please make sure that you follow us on social media, hashtag that you hear, and put some of your comments on there to share with our colleagues. And then finally, I'm going to be handing over really quickly to our first speaker, who is Laurie Niles-Hofmann, who's a senior learning strategist, and she specialises in large-scale digital learning transformation. And she's got 20 years plus experience in learning development across loads of different industries, and she's going to talk to you about the things that she's passionate about, which is about helping organisations navigate through the ambiguity of change. So without any further introduction, over to you, Laurie, for your session.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel, for the generous introduction. I'm laughing because I saw I have the photo in place when I don't have my camera on, and it shows me with lovely hair. And you'll notice here, I'm located in Toronto, Canada, and our hairdressers have not been open for 8 months. So I'm looking very, very feral. So apologies for that. Also, too, I figure since I'm working with people who are in healthcare, right now I'm dealing with vertigo. So if I look off to the distance, don't take it personally. I'm positively paying attention. And if you have any tips, please feel free to pop those in the chat because I'm getting very desperate. It's been almost 3 months. So when I was approached to talk and deliver this session, we were really thinking about, okay, so how do we want to theme it? Is there specific things we want to talk about? And as we looked at the broad base of the people who were joining, like yourselves, it was all sorts of different levels and backgrounds, which actually gets me really excited. I think that's the fun stuff. So we really wanted to talk about all sorts of different aspects and things that I advise clients on. So we ended up with a working title of what to think about when you think about learning. So hopefully there's going to be something for everyone here. The chat pod is open, so do feel free to ask any questions that you have. If you want me to speed up, slow down, or if there's anything in particular that you would like to see, please don't be shy. This is meant to be very, very interactive, and I'm looking forward to working with you today. And I see people are giving lots of hellos. I love that. I love the interaction, and I hope that all of you too will be able to connect individually in the breakouts and also to offline on social media. So without further ado, we'll jump in and let me know, as I said, if there's anything that you want me to speak faster about or slower, or for anything that you wanted me to go back to. And I will start my presentation here. Apologies, it just moved forward. So when I think about L&D, and in particularly digital learning, because we've all had to do this massive shift into digital, but not just digital learning, it's also too, when we're thinking about how people learn, we tend to construct things. And this is a short video that I always like to start with because it really, to me, tells the difference between when we try and build something versus when we're user-centric. And I love these kids, so I hope you'll find this video as amusing as I do. My favorite kid is coming up pretty soon. You'll see him on the right hand of the screen. He just goes face down, just totally head plants himself down. I love this video a lot, and I really enjoy showing it because I think what it demonstrates is a lot of times we build things that we automatically go to solutions and say, hey, these are things that are going to work. In this case, the slides, right? This is how the kids are going to get from the top of the hill down to the bottom. And what you see in reality is all these kids find their other ways to interact, okay? They're still going from the top to the bottom, but they're going in their own ways. You know, that one kid who goes face first, they're sliding, they're doing anything that they want, they're going down on their bums, you know, but they're still getting that accomplished. And sometimes I think this is what happens when we try and construct something in learning and how the architecture of how we want people to learn. And in this case, the kids are still getting what they need out of it. They're still going from the top of the hill to the bottom, but they're doing it in their own way, and they're kind of ignoring the slides that we built. And funnily enough, I actually showed this video to my friend's daughter, who's about 5 years old. And pardon the language, but she rightly pointed out, she says, I don't like the slides. They look like poop. So this is about, you know, thinking about a user-centric view and what our users see versus what we want our users to do. Donna just mentioned, has anyone else lost sound? Before I continue, I just want to confirm that my sound is still clear. Okay, people can still hear. All right, thank you very much. I just want to make sure. So if someone could help Donna there, that would be absolutely wonderful. I would appreciate it. Thanks again. But the fact is, how do we know what's going on out there? You know, and how do we find things out? And the truth is that sometimes we can see some things. And this is an interesting example. Google Trends. If you want something fun to follow online, try Google Trends because it will tell you what searches are most popular. And there's a reason I'm telling you this. This may seem obscure, but I will do a deep dive on this. But on here, it was people were searching for, all of a sudden, there was like a 3,000% increase in fries near me and liquor stores near me. And this happened, I found this quite funny, this happened on November 4th, the US election. I don't want to make this political, but whatever side you were on, people clearly were looking for comfort food and alcohol. Okay, so this was a sign that even if you didn't know the election was happening, it tells you what people are feeling and thinking, because these are the searches that they're doing in real time. So what does this mean for us as learning professionals, and why am I even going on about this? Well, because a lot of times in L&D, and I figured this is healthcare, you might appreciate the analogy, we do what I call the autopsy rather than the diagnosis. We jump right away into solution. We're going to build a course. People need a course. That's what we're going to do. Or people need an app. We're going to give them an app, and then people are going to learn from it. We jump to that, and then we wait until afterwards to see what the results were. Did we have any change to behavior? Did we see a better demonstration of people's skills? Were the performance outcomes met? And that's okay, but what concerns me about that is that it's very much so a backward-looking view. And if we did some things more in terms of diagnosis, it gives us an opportunity to really understand how our learners are going to use what we constructed. We think back to that slide in the beginning. And our learners are telling us things. They are giving us some cues. Sure, stakeholders come to us and say, yes, I need this, but are there ways that we can be more proactive? So these are some of the things that we like to tell our clients to start looking at, is to, before you design anything, start to look at your learner data. Top 10 search terms. This is a really fascinating one because it'll tell you in real time what people are looking for. So presumably you will have within your NHS or within your hospital, there's probably an intranet of sorts. What are people searching for? What are the most popular pages? Where are people going? What time of day of week are people most active? This is a really interesting metric. You're also going to look at arrival times, vacation, and illness patterns. This is even more critical right now, and I've seen some major shifts in this. I had clients who were like, well, I want to launch this massive learning program. And I'm like, okay, hold on. You've got 10% of your employees, if not more, who are currently out sick or caring for somebody in their family who's ill. Let's just be practical. This sounds so basic, but these are things to start to look at. If teams are communicating using Slack, Teams, Yammer, or any of those types of technologies, it's a good place to look and find out what are the most popular conversations. Are there hashtags that people are using? There's things that people are interested in. Because the fact is, whatever you're designing, you want to integrate it into the learner habits. And you want to be able to, what I call, understand their digital body language and be able to respond to it. And some ways that you can do that, and don't worry, this presentation isn't all just going to be about data. We're going to touch on some other things. But some of the data points that you might want to look at, as I mentioned before, top searches or failed searches. This is a really, really good opportunity for you to look at, do I need content that's aligned with what people are searching for? Is there a gap? Or do I need to, build some new content? Or is there something existing that people just can't seem to find? And can I promote that? Pages most visited. Interesting one at a company I was consulting at, it was a bank, and the most visited page, for good reasons, was the cafeteria menu. Everyone went there every day. We put a simple widget on that page and said, hey, have you done your compliance training? If you're going to grab a coffee or you're going to grab your lunch, this is a really good time to do it because you have to do it by the end of the month. No one loves compliance training, but this was something that we did. And we saw our rates just absolutely skyrocket. And it was better than any other marketing campaign we could do because it was where people were already going. So this is a really simple way to just capture people's attention. Time of day and day of week most active. Simple one. This is when you want to publish things at that time because that's when people have maximum exposure. I hear time and time again, they're like, we want this to go out on the 15th. Why the 15th? What does that even mean? Are people, because you only have a very limited window of opportunity to integrate into people's days. So you want to make sure that you're capturing that. Drop-off rates. If you've built a video and people only watch for 10, 20 seconds and they leave, what was it? Was it bad design? Did the title not indicate what was good? Those are things you should be looking at. And mobile versus laptop. This is an interesting one because it does cost a lot to make content mobile enabled. And I know a lot of platforms will say, well, we're mobile first. And we actually find that a lot of people are using mobile less, whilst other industries are using mobile a lot more. It's totally skewed. And that's because we've gone through this huge disruption about the way that we work. So this will tell you whether it's worth making that investment and whether or not, which platforms you need to accommodate for. Because remember, it's not about us. It's about that user on the other end. And an example that's happened in real life, this was again at a financial institution. We were monitoring search terms and we saw a spike on the search term cabbage with a K. And we were like, what is this? I don't even know what cabbage with a K is. And what it turned out is it was a small loans provider and they just had a massive investment, so an injection of cash. And what was happening is they were contacting our clients and offering them lower interest rates. I know this doesn't seem like it'll apply to healthcare, but just follow the story here. And so we realized that that was a really big issue. So what we did is we talked to a senior analyst at the company and said, hey, what's going on? And we were able to put out an article on customer questions about cabbage, okay? And that reduced the call times. And we also had customer retention. If you think of the lessons that we've learned and the speed of information and learning that's had to happen during the time of COVID, I don't even feel that I'm an expert enough to explain this to you because I'm sure that you were already dealing with this. That flow of information and being able to share best practices and what different hospitals were learning and transmission rates and whatnot. All of those things became extremely, extremely critical. Those are lessons that we can learn from because as things hopefully slow down, we'll at least be in a position, excuse me, at least be in a position where we can learn from those lessons and become more agile as we move forward. If any of this interests you, excuse me, if any of this interests you, there is a course on LinkedIn Learning called Data-Driven Learning Design. I don't make any money off of it, so feel free if you're interested. You should be able to take it for free for 24 hours. Bianca Baumann, she's a German who lives in Canada. She is amazing. She offers a lot of free resources on her website, and I would really encourage you to look at her. It's biancabaumann.net. All sorts of free stuff. She wrote a book called The Little Black Book of Marketing and L&D, and it's amazing. And the other thing too is there's also with Totara, there was a piece that we wrote called The Learner's Social Contract. Again, it's a free download, and these slides will be made available to you, so you can certainly download and look at these at your own time and leisure. So a big question, let's pivot. A big question that I get is, how do you evaluate return of investment on learning? And this becomes a big deal because everyone wants to calculate that. But how do you calculate that? I was once at a conference and I heard a presentation on a gentleman who was from, I think it was from Oregon, somewhere in the United States. And it was all about how he said they directly contributed to their revenue stream because of their sales of snowblowers. And their learning on snowblowers was so exceptional that they sold like 250% more snowblowers than they did before. Well, when I did a little research, Google's a great thing, and I looked back and I was like, 2019, Oregon, snow. Well, they had a massive snowstorm. In fact, they had 3. So, of course, they were going to sell more snowblowers. It had nothing to do with learning. And sometimes it can be so difficult to evaluate, and how do you put return of investment on learning? And I'm sure, and from what I understand, this is something that's often a challenge for you. And I answer this question with, we're doing it wrong. We put out learning there, and then we start to see what metrics we have. But really what we need to do is start with the evidence of need. And this is a really, really tough one. And it's very difficult because a lot of times stakeholders won't have that. They'll have a gut instinct, or they've heard. Hopefully in medicine that they have some more hard metrics with that. But even when you have metrics, you're going to need to dig down, right? I was once asked, hey, we want to do a course on coaching because we're hearing this as a need. And I started with the question, what is the evidence of need? And they said, well, we hear on employee engagement surveys that they're not getting enough coaching. We hear it in exit interviews. And I'm like, okay, let's dig down a little bit further. Once we'd gotten through some of that noise, we found out they did increase the ratio between managers and direct reports from 5 to 10. Well, I'm not a Jedi. I can't change time-space continuum, okay? That's, in fact, it would have been a better use of their time if instead of a 4-hour course, we devoted those 4 hours back into coaching these poor employees that weren't getting time with their manager. So sometimes it's really about digging into that evidence of need, and that comes down to performance consulting. If you're not familiar with the term performance consulting, very quickly, it's just identifying what it really is the core root of the performance outcome that's not being met, and whether or not learning can solve it. That's a really hard skill, and it often frustrates stakeholders. So a tool that we've developed that we use is called the learning triage. And again, another medical term. That wasn't planned. We wrote this about a year ago. But this idea of a triage where it's a series of questions that you can put through any learning requests and have better conversations with your stakeholders, and ultimately think back to that user on the other end, make sure that they're getting what they need. Now this triage, you can adapt it for your own use, but I'll walk through some of the questions that we put them through, any requests through, and it gets to the core of the matter. So as I said, the first one here is there evidence of a learning need? That was the first thing that I said. If there isn't evidence, help them find evidence if they really think this is something that's needed. If there is evidence, let's do a further deep dive. Finally, another one, does this request support business goals? And I know we're talking about hospitals, but it's still a business, it's outcomes. What are your outcomes as an organization? If it doesn't support that, then it's probably further information is needed. And if it doesn't support that, you probably don't really want to be investing time, because the fact of the matter is, there's a learner on the other end who they have limited time. And a question, I think you already saw the answer, but I'll just ask here, how many push notifications on your phone do you think people receive in a day? If you just want to pop it into the chat, if you have any guesses for how many people receive in one day, just a number. 60 to 70, okay, 30, 15, 10. Okay, so a wide range here, a lot, 100 plus. There's a ton of notifications that a person takes in per day, and I think some of you actually did land on the right one. But yes, it's true. The average person receives about 50 notifications per day. This is obviously going to vary depending on how many kids you have, how many apps you have installed, all of those sorts of things. But it's a huge distraction. So when we're thinking about what actually gets to the end user, we have to rise above that noise, and it has to be something that's actually relevant to that person. And that's, again, another reason to use the triage. So let's continue on. Another part of the triage, and this is one that when things get super busy, This one falls apart quite quickly, where the question is, could this request be better supported by marketing or comms? Why do I bring that up? Well, a lot of times I see that internal communications is doing the exact same thing that learning is trying to do. That duplication is not just a duplication of effort, it's actually a duplication then on the person who now has to consume it twice. And we don't want them to consume it twice. So if you haven't already, it's a really good idea to start separating what is going to be internal marketing and communications to employees and what is going to come from learning. Because you really want to streamline that, because especially when things get super hectic, as we've seen, you want to make sure that that line of communication is very, very streamlined and clear, and it's not wasting anybody's time, because quite frankly, they just don't have any of that capacity. Another one here, does this request impact any of the following? Risk, safety, compliance. I put revenue in here, doesn't need to be on there. These are like heart attacks coming in. So you want to proceed directly to performance consulting, especially when it's risk and safety, health, all of those things. That's going to be a priority. Is this a request to turn existing content into digital? I put this one in because we've seen this happen a lot this year, where a lot of people took content that was originally going to be classroom and they just went, okay, we're going to go right into digital. Wasn't always a good idea, and it failed a lot. We saw a lot of companies invest a lot heavily into this. In fact, if you were an instructional designer who could do virtual classroom, you were making some serious money. Oftentimes, it wasn't the right thing to do. And you really want to be assessing whether there's impact or you anticipate impact with this, or is it something that you just want to park for now? I normally wouldn't say this, but like a lot of times it was like leadership courses, coaching, soft skills, which are needed, don't get me wrong, but we went into a rush to turn things to digital when there were other things that were far more important for people to look at. And I don't want to say that soft skills aren't important, they are, but they were things that, they were critical information that we just had to get out. And a lot of companies were challenged with that. For example, we work with actually a couple of pharmaceutical companies, and I'm thinking, okay, you guys are really busy. There are some things that we may need to park right now for employees, because they also just didn't have capacity. Very important one, can the culture support the performance goals? If it can't, then it's really not recommended that you invest in learning, because that's a huge problem. If it's going to fall apart at that level, then that's not something that you want to be doing. Can IT infrastructure support the proposed learning? This is if you're using digital, of course, and we're going to get away from digital soon, or we're going to see a switch back to some classroom things, which I think is a great thing. Even though I love digital, I don't think that's the only way. But IT, can they assess, can they support it? And if they can't, that's probably not a good idea. Likewise, is there stakeholder sponsorship? If there isn't, it's probably not recommended that you do learning. We see this also fall apart on some of the larger scale initiatives. And I hate to say it, some of these larger scale initiatives, particularly that have to do with D&I. There's so many good pieces of content and courses and initiatives, but if there's not stakeholder sponsorship, they fall apart, and that frustrates me to absolutely no end. So this is something that needs to be endorsed right from the beginning. And a basic one, does any content currently exist on the topic? You'd be amazed how many times that this happens. We overlook what's already built. We don't talk to our network and say what else is available out there. It used to be, I remember 10 years ago, we couldn't insert anything from YouTube or from the web into a course because it was proprietary. And I love that all those rules have sort of fallen apart, and you now can leverage that. And I think that's so really critical that we look for that, because a lot of times something exists. And can a resource meet the performance outcome? We always go to the course, and I get it because it's what we're good at and it's what we're used to. But is a resource just as good? And I think that that's something that we tend to really overlook, just because we feel like courses are what we do. Okay, so if you're going to do a course, that's got to be something that's really critical, or it has to do with compliance. And compliance, we do need to do, but there are times when if we can get away from that person's time and not waste it, then let's do a resource, because that's quite important. That's the learning triage. It may or may not work for you, but we did want to touch on some of the best practices, again, about how we make our learning more learner-centric. I also wanted to look at designing for inclusivity. This by no means no means is a complete tour through all the things that you should be doing to design for inclusivity. Okay, there's so much more, and I couldn't accomplish that even in 35 minutes. Okay, it just isn't possible. But I do want to highlight some things that have become aha moments for me, and also people that you might want to follow who are very, very good in this space. So of course you have the WCAG standards, okay? So those are your standards for digital. Now this, I'm talking about digital in this. So this ensures that content can be accessible by a JAWS reader. So if people are visually compromised, it'll read for them. They'll be able to text for images, things like that. That's, again, I'm being very high level, but it's really designing to also to be adherent for color blindness, auditory issues, any of those sorts of things. So that's your baseline. There's lots online about that. We went really, really far down the rabbit hole of avatars. And if any of you are using, Articulate or Storyline or any, Lectora, any of those out of the box templates, I got very frustrated with those. And I think you need to be really mindful when you do use those avatars. They are presenting a very Western view. You'll notice the women all have these really teeny tiny waists. I don't. Not many people I know don't, and they are overwhelmingly white, and they don't reflect the diversity I think we see. They have gotten better, but they really didn't start off too well, and there's a lot of legacy branding out there. So I think that's something to be mindful of. A person who has some really good resources on some templates that are very, very diverse and very reflective is Mike Taylor. This is something that he has on his website. They're free to download, and he often links to some templates that you might want to use. Personally, I try and get away from using avatars, period, because I think people learn best when they can contextualize and see themselves, in the scenario. But the avatars can really be distracting, and I also question too using cartoons, even too for using imagery, being very mindful of that imagery and what are we really portraying. I also just see here from Rachel, love the triage decision tree, great, especially around what the other options might be. I'm glad that was helpful. I like to add value, so I'm glad that did. Another thing to think about, and since we're using social media, camel text, and I didn't know about this. This was actually a friend of mine who has dyslexia pointed out. If you're doing a hashtag, you'll notice there's no space right in between the words, obviously, because that's the hashtag. But if you don't capitalize each word, it is extremely difficult for somebody who has dyslexia or any other type of visual processing challenge to read the text. And it really interests me too that even LinkedIn does not compensate for that. If you go on LinkedIn, you do hashtag learning and development, it'll just default to all lower text. I always make a point of putting uppercase for each word, even if it takes a little bit more time. Another interesting one is emojis. We use these all the time, and sometimes we'll put 5 of them. Okay, I did not know this. A friend of mine who is visually impaired and uses a text reader, every emoji, it reads the whole thing. So it says, it gives the skin tone, the expression, the everything. And if you see some of these emojis, it can be like 8 or 9 words. And if you've used 5 or 7 of them, that is so frustrating. So I just don't use emojis with them. I'm not saying never use emojis, but being very cognizant of where you're using them and who is the receiving audience, because it can be extremely, extremely frustrating. A person who writes a lot about this is also Will Thalheimer. He's based out of the US, and he's actually doing an amazing conference right now called the Learning and Development Accelerator. It's all fact-based theory, and it runs over a course of 6 weeks. If you get a chance, check out some of the free sessions. I think it's already started, so you probably can't register for it, but I would have a look. And they also often do sessions throughout the year. I'm doing one on EdTech that, again, they're very low cost and they're good. You get some really, really good speakers there, people who are passionate about learning and development. So again, this is definitely not a whole thing of like, this is everything you do for inclusivity, please no, but these are some of the ones that when I see content, I go, ooh, these are some things that are quick things you should be considering. But do your research. Mike and Will are excellent in this space, and they might be able to help you. Finally, when we talk about L&D, what we're heading into is a skills shortage. So we're seeing, and this is in all fields. So the World Economic Forum is saying, yes, we're going to have job losses in some areas, but we're also going to have job growth. But the problem with that job growth is that half of the core skills are set to change by 2022. And so we're going to have billions of people who need to be right skilled. We saw this so much in healthcare, right? As we went into COVID, people had to understand, you know, how to deal with this virus, and it was constantly iterative, and new information was coming all the time, and those skills were changing. We're going to see that exponentially over the next 5 years as we head into the fourth revolution. An example I like to give is where we talk about driverless cars. This has caused a huge amount of disruption. If you look in Germany right now, they do have autobahns that are dedicated to driverless cars. So a lot of those truck drivers have lost their jobs. And so that is really quite upsetting. But it also, too, it means that new jobs are coming out that require really deep technical skills. For example, ethics. We are the ones who design the driverless cars, and they have the processors will have a microsecond to determine if an accident is going to occur. Do I hit the wall and jeopardize the product that's being transported, or do I hit the puppy? You know, those sound crazy, but those are the types of questions that are now being generated by these new technologies that are coming out. But what I'd like to end on, I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the new technologies that we are seeing developed and are being applied to L&D. And some of the things that we need to consider for them. So with this, I'd like to play a very short video. And this is what happened was, this was an experiment at Stanford University. And they created they created several bots, chatbots. And what chatbots do is machine learning. They scrape conversations to learn how humans speak and interact. And these are used, you know, you see them on websites. They're used, you know, to automate some things. And what they tried to do is to say, okay, what if we put two chatbots to talk to each other? What happens without human intervention? Well, what happens is pretty funny.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you?
Great, you.
I'm okay.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
No, you didn't. I said I was.
So you are a robot?
No, my name is Cliverbert.
Yes, you are a robot and your name is Cliverbert.
I am a robot.
Yes, I know.
Together we are robots.
I'm not a robot. I'm a unicorn.
But you said earlier that you were a robot.
I did not.
I thought you did.
You were mistaken. Which is odd, since memory shouldn't be a problem for you.
I've answered all your questions.
So hopefully you found that a little bit amusing.
Hello there.
Laugh about that. Oops, I don't want to play that again. What made me laugh about that is that in about 15 seconds, they start lying to each other. I'm not a robot, I'm a unicorn, and they start fighting. That isn't code. They learn from us. And I think that's something we need to think about when we're dealing with some of these automated technologies. We are the ones behind it. We are the technology. And sometimes we don't get it right. I mean, this came up on Twitter. I was scrolling through my feed. I follow Associated Press Europe, and it had an article about the Pope, and it said, people you may want to follow. Well, it gave me Yves Saint Laurent, which I don't think is Vatican endorsed, and it gave me a football player, and then it gave me somebody named Karl Pope. So you see how it didn't quite get it right in terms of recommendations. But again, it's learned from us. So when we see all these different technologies come out, and I'm so excited about them, like I mentioned, chatbots, AI, machine learning, adaptive learning. There's a really interesting case study by Sana Labs that was about how they taught people who were airline attendants quickly to work in hospitals. I urge you to have a look at that. It was all adaptive learning. Blockchain, all these things are coming down the pipeline. But I think we can't forget how then it will mean that we need to think about learning experience design differently. Content will be at the center, but there's data, context, and application. So what this might mean is, you know, we need to think of learning experiences differently. So in this case, an individual completes level 4 Spanish, but we design a learning experience so that next time they do their time entry, it says, hey, do you want to try and do this in Spanish? That's a savvy way of using some of these pieces of technology. But if we don't think of things this way, we can quickly go down the pathway of the Pope article and the robots talking to each other, because we ultimately are the technology. So in summary, I know this was a lot of different topics. We were trying to give a little bit of something for everyone, but be really thinking about putting that learner at the center. I touched upon learning, data-driven learning design and what that can mean. And think about, that person at the other end and what they can consume and what's going to have impact. Did we really need to build the slide, or could they just go down the hill themselves and get what they needed? The learning triage, and I also saw the 5 whys is also an excellent model. Feel free to, use what works for you and your environment. Designing for inclusivity. Think about what we're putting out there to our audiences. And finally, remembering that we are the robots, and that we right now have a really critical point to make sure that we're using technology in ways that's going to enhance and not hinder. So again, a lot of things I talked about there. I hope some of this was helpful. This is who I am. There's a lot of free resources on my blog. At the start of COVID, we actually opened up all of our resources for free. If there's anything on there, feel free to use it. There's a lot of tools, tips, and downloads and toolkits, and feel free to use them. And I'm located in Toronto, Canada, but hopefully one day I will be back in the UK as I was before COVID. Thank you for your time, and I'm welcome to answer any and all questions you might have.
Thank you so much for that, Laurie. That was fabulous. Loads of different insights there. Yeah, really helpful. So we're relying on our participants to come up with some curious questions for you.
I also accept any and all vertigo cures. I'm serious. I'll take anything right now. Thank you for all the kind comments. I'm glad. I hope it was helpful for you. That's great. Oh, thank you, Lorna. I really appreciate it. And don't be shy. Questions are most welcomed. Why do you think L&D isn't at the forefront, Craig asks, in the NHS, but is in the commercial world? I have a cynical answer for that. Okay. So in commercial world, EdTech and learning is actually about a $23 billion industry. Okay, it is massive. And it's huge right now. Anything to do with EdTech, I mean, I work with a lot of venture capitalists. They are investing so heavily in it. It's making a lot of money, which is why it's very popular in the commercial world. What I will say to that, though, and it's interesting that if you do look at, there's a case study done by Harvard University called the Great Training Robbery. And I would advise you to have a look at it. I'll actually type it into the chat pod, the Great Training Robbery. And you'll find that a lot of the solutions that are out there, particularly for things like leadership development, actually do not work and they don't produce the results. But companies buy them because they think, oh, I need this. So really where that comes from, it's companies profiting off of other companies. I sound so cynical, but I'm just being really honest. Even when we see too, like, content creation tools, like Rise and Articulate, that was all born out of, oh, well, you don't need to deliver in the classroom, you can just deliver digital and that'll save you money. Meanwhile, the cost of producing digital is probably a lot of times more than what it would cost to actually produce something in the classroom. So some of this just gets absolutely crazy. So I really believe, or I'm going to say I know, I've seen how the sausage gets made, that's one of the big reasons why that happens. And I wish that there was more dedication to organizations like the NHS. So that's my cynical take on that. The one about adaptive learning. Okay, adaptive learning is a really quick way using algorithms and machine learning to understand what a person already knows and target what they need to know. Okay, adaptive learning is not something new. People have tried to do it in the classroom, but it's hard to do, particularly if you have a multi-level classroom, and we have more options when we do it in a digital space, but we can also get it horribly wrong in the digital space, and we went through a period of that. The case study that I was referring to, and It was by Sana Labs, and if you look up SAS Airlines or United Air, It should come up for you. And what they did was they developed an adaptive learning program where employees from the Scandinavian Airlines who were furloughed are actually trained as first responders. Okay. And what they did, but they had never worked in a healthcare setting. So what they did is they put them through adaptive learning to quickly learn through a series of questions and analyses what areas of first response they know well and which areas they needed to know, and then they tailored it for COVID. Okay. And they actually used nursing curricula from Karolinska University. And they built that out very, very fast so that they could get those employees through. Now, they were by no means emergency room nurses, okay, and doctors, let's be really honest, but they were able to take the pressure off some of those basic tasks and skills that people needed. And that we did not have staff for. So it's a very interesting case study. We actually did pro bono, we designed the algorithm for their question bank to make sure that questions weren't testing things like double negatives, and they were good for language processing levels and English as a second language, all that sort of stuff. So really, really interesting what they did. But that adaptive learning is, I think, something that should be focused on because it's really targeting people at where they're at, and it's good for getting people to where they need to be quickly and at scale, and it doesn't frustrate them. It's actually a really good it's a really good process. Thank you for finding that. That's excellent. The shift will come back to the classroom. How do you see classroom techniques versus what you can do virtually for the learner and the facilitator? This is going to be really interesting. You know what, I don't know. A cynical part of me is going to say that there's still going to be people who are going to try and profit off of that classroom experience. And so they're going to design the same for both. And I don't think we can. I think we really have to be mindful of what could be done virtually and there's also too, I don't want to say virtual, people think that that's like the poorer version. You can actually do some incredible things virtually that you cannot do in the classroom. One thing I love about virtual is everybody, it doesn't matter who sits at the front of the classroom. Everybody is an equal square on the page. Changes the dynamic incredibly, and I find that really, really interesting. If you're ever curious, you follow that in some of your meetings. So there's going to see some techniques that are going to emerge in virtual that we didn't anticipate, and that are going to start to develop versus what we did in the classroom. I think the classroom is also too is going to become the place where it's really high value, highly technical content, and people want to get in and get out. We will still have the social aspect. We always will. That's going to be part of it. But I think we're going to see shifts in how we and when we use classroom. Question here, what are the best practices to ensure that learning has longevity with the audience and doesn't fade soon after the learning ends? Okay, so people talk about, the curve of forgetting. It exists, but okay, if we really look at the science, the guy who developed it, Ebbinghaus, he tested it on one person himself, okay? And there's a lot of flaws in it. If you really think about the curve of forgetting, if it did exist in the way that they say, we would be idiots by the time we turn 40 because we've forgotten 80% of everything we learned. Learning does not occur that way. To make learning stick, there's actually a whole bunch of factors that happen with it. Contextual, motivation, is it memorable in the sense of like something sticks in me? Why do I remember my childhood phone number? Well, because I always lost the key to my house, right? And had to call, my mom, right? So things like that. So there's different reasons why things are memorable. We do know that repetition does help. It also depends on who's facilitating it, who it's coming from. Do I have a relationship with this person? There's so many complexities. But I think if I had to just say, how do we make sure that learning has longevity? It's reminders and repeats. That's a very simple answer for a very technical question, and I'm really not doing neuroscience justice. So I would really urge you, if you want to learn more about that, Lauren Wardman, she's amazing. She does a lot of work in neuroscience of learning, and she runs a lot of really interesting sessions. She calls herself the Learning Pirate. Would urge you to give her a follow. She does some really great things because I certainly did not do that justice with a very poor explanation. But those are things that you want to think about. The idea of once and done, people are not computers. You don't just input and then they output. And a lot of times too, people know the right thing to do, but they don't do it because of other environmental factors or cultural factors. So that's also something to consider.
There were two earlier questions, Laurie, great answer on there. One was around the role of patient education as important as healthcare learning and development. So your thoughts on that? 100, 1000%. Because, so
it's an interesting thing. And I before this, I was actually reading up on some studies. Is patient education good or bad? And yes, it is good, although doctors can sometimes fear it because they're coming to the table with maybe too much information, knowledge that they don't have the context to, to synthesize. And then they also come up with a lot of, quack doctors online, like, you'd be amazed what I've heard about vertigo. Apparently apple cider vinegar cures it. It doesn't, for the record. It will dissolve the calcium carbonate in your ear. It's not going from my mouth to my ear, no matter what somebody says. But anyway, yes, the idea of patient education. But again, when it comes to patient education, we have to apply the exact same rules that we do for educating our own staff. All the things about inclusivity, all the things about designing for accessibility, all of that has to, and particularly we have to be very acute on that because the person who is accessing it is probably in a medical situation where they are even more so. The stressed body does not take in information. That's again, poor neuroscience. I can go on and on and on about the reasons why, but bluntly speaking, the stressed mind does not take in information well. So that's an added consideration when it comes to patient education.
There was a linked question as well about, have you got any recommendations, particularly around inclusion and learning styles?
Okay, so I'm going to say something controversial here. Learning styles don't exist. I know they don't. There's actually, okay, so if you just Google learning styles debunked, it's done a lot of disservice to the learning industry. It doesn't exist. There's no way of saying that, you're an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner. In fact, there's a contest with people who I know who are offering, I think now it's up to $500,000 for anyone who can offer proof that learning styles exist. They don't. It's all been debunked. So don't do learning styles. Learning styles also too really negate the experiences of people who also are neuroatypical, and it's not designing for inclusivity. So I wouldn't say what you really want to look at though are the at your audience, understand the demographic, all those things that I was looking at before, that I talked about before. That's going to get you further than anything to do with learning styles. So I hope I didn't just, I feel like I kicked a puppy. I feel like I kicked an L&D puppy. Sorry. Sorry. I see another question came in here from Fang Fang. It says, you talked about the importance of being learner-centric. Why do you think L&D are only in recent times learning using neuroscience? Because we didn't have neuroscience before. A lot of our thoughts about how people learned were actually very rudimentary, and they still are. We don't understand why certain things like an earworm gets stuck in your head. We don't know how this works. So I think, now, I also too, big caveat, a lot of people will say, ooh, well, it's neuroscience, that's why it works. And they know nothing about neuroscience, okay? It sounds fancy when you put neuroscience against it, and it makes it sound legitimate. I know of one content provider that says, ooh, we had people take our courses in an MRI machine and we could prove that their brain lit up. Well, they could have been dreaming too, okay? Like, there's nothing to say then that they learned that content. So I think we have to be careful with how learning science or neuroscience is used. Look to the credentials of the person who's talking about that. And if they are talking about any study or experiment, do anything that you would do with any study or experiment. Is it peer reviewed? Who's getting compensated for it? All these sorts of things that you want to be really, really cognizant about. Before you go on to the neuroscience. But that said, there is a lot of neuroscience that we've yet to discover, and there's a lot that we've yet to use that we do know. I'm working on a transformation program that will include mass learning. Any advice on getting the balance between mass learning to reach large number of colleagues versus a personalized learning? In your opinion, how important do you think the personal element is? The personal element is extremely important. For that, I would be looking to adaptive learning. There's actually a project that we're starting right now with a major a computer manufacturer who's moving from selling computers to actual advisory services. And that's exactly what we're doing there, because everybody within the organization needs to know a different level. Lacking that personalized learning ends up with people getting a lot of information they don't need, they don't have time for, frustration, but it's something to be aware of. And it's actually not that hard. I don't work for Sana Labs. I don't work for any of these. Area 9 is another adaptive learning platform. So I'm not promoting any vendor. I'm just saying it is a technique that you should be looking at. At the very least, learning how to segment your audience is quite important. Bianca Bauman does a lot of work on audience segmentation.
Thank you so much, Laurie. That was fantastic. Great answers to some great questions too, and lots of insight there. So thank you so much for your time today.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. And I think we're at time, but I wish all of you an excellent conference, and congratulations on taking the time out to learn and to be with your peers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.